Hi, peeps. You're listening to She's My Cherry Pie, the baking podcast from the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessie Sheehan. I'm a baker, recipe developer, and the author of 4 baking books. Each Saturday, I'm hanging out with the sweetest bakers around and taking a deep dive into their signature bakes. My guest today is someone near and dear to my heart, Dorie Greenspan. Dorie is an extraordinary baker, cookbook author, and part-time Parisian, and I am so lucky to call her my friend. She's been on the show to talk about choux pastry with me, and she's back today to talk all about sablé, the French shortbread cookie, and to do a deep dive with me into her world peace cookies, a chocolate sablé of sorts. We discussed Dorie's favorite childhood sweets from her years spent in Brooklyn, the night she nearly burned down her parents' kitchen, the first time she ever tasted fleur de sel, and the new book she is working on all about simple cakes. Then we dive into her world peace cookies, something I know we could all use right now. I loved catching up with Dorie, so stay tuned for our chat. If you'd like to follow along, you can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.com. Today's episode is presented by King Arthur Baking Company. Okay, peeps, you know I'm all about easy peasy baking, right? That's why I'm absolutely loving King Arthur's brand new bread mix kits. If you're looking to whip up delicious fresh bread in just 1 hour, King Arthur Baking's new line of bread mix kits has you covered. You can have focaccia, flatbread, pull-apart garlic bread, or pretzel bites on the table without any fuss in no time, because everything you need, including the yeast, is right in the box. These mixes will definitely have a place in my pantry this season and beyond. Visit kingarthurbaking.com to save 10% on these mixes with code BREAD. This episode is presented by Kerrygold. Let's talk for a minute about butter, which is truly one of life's simple pleasures. Beautiful butters like those from Kerrygold are as good as gold to me and all the butter lovers in my life. Kerrygold butter is the most special of them all. It's made with milk from Irish grass-fed cows and has a rich flavor and creamy texture, thanks to its naturally higher butterfat percentage. This also gives Kerrygold butter that beautiful natural golden yellow color we all know and love. Think about how many simple, delicious moments involve butter. Making grilled cheese for a loved one. I can hear the butter sizzling in the pan right now. Can't you? Slathering butter on an amazing scone or banana bread that you spent your Saturday morning baking? Even just passing butter around a lively table when you get together with friends and family for a meal. There's a whole world of Kerrygold butters for you to discover and enjoy. Learn more at kerrygoldusa.com. Peeps, have you heard about Cherry Bomb Jubilee? It's our annual conference for women in food, drink, and hospitality, and it's happening Saturday, April 12th in New York City. I always love being at Jubilee and connecting with other bakers, pastry chefs, and cookbook authors. If you'd like to join us, you can snag early bird tickets at cherrybomb.com. They're on sale now until December 31st, so don't delay. And if you're an official Bomb Squad member, check your inbox for special member pricing. I hope to see you there. Let's chat with today's guest. Dorie, so excited to have you on She's My Cherry Pie again and to talk world peace cookies with you and so much more.
I love being with you. Thank you.
So I love asking guests about early baking or cooking memories, and you have famously shared a fantastic early cooking or frying memory of making French fries with your friends as a 7th grader, and I would love you to share that story with our listeners.
Oh, that story. So let me just say that when my first book came out, Sweet Times, my brother said to me, I looked at that introduction and you didn't mention anything about the fries. And I thought, are you out of your mind? No, who would trust me after that? So 7th grade, 2 friends and I wanted a snack. And one of them, Alan, I think, said, let's make French fries. I had never made anything. I guess they hadn't either. I'd never seen French fries being made. I only saw the box that came out of the freezer. So I took the box, didn't read the instructions because I didn't, and I put a pot of oil up to boil. And I put a cover on it because in 7th grade science, I learned that if you cover water, right, it'll boil faster. And put the pot up to boil, lifted the lid, and flames. I mean, the kinds of gorgeous flames that like lick the side of the pot and go up to the kitchen cabinets, the ones that were just renovated. Oh, yeah. So that was my first experience. Can you imagine if I had put that in the intro to my first book?
Oh, my gosh. But I love your brother for asking that. He sounds like somebody I want to hang out with. That's hilarious.
I did finally, I wrote about it. I think maybe it was in Around My French Table, and that was books into my career.
So you felt comfortable admitting it.
At last.
Yes. So I think I've read that event kind of turned you off cooking until you were married and had no choice but to cook and to bake for you and Michael. But before I jump into those early kind of Dorie cooking and baking stories, I would love to hear about any sweets or baked goods that you recall loving as a kid growing up in Brooklyn. I literally mined your book. I mined all of your books that I have to find some. And I came up with the melody cookies, the bread from a bakery that your mom would buy that was near your house. But then she also would go get a box of butter cookies from a bakery
you are such
far
a
away.
good researcher. It's funny because I just finished the introduction for my cake book that will come out 2025. And I wrote about my mother and the baked things that were always in our kitchen. Not one of them was ever baked by her. Ever. I've never seen her bake. But she had such a sweet tooth, and she loved cakes and cookies, and she made sure that there was always something sweet in the house. So the bread came from a bakery called Ratchik's in Brooklyn, and that was the bakery that Julia Turshen's grandparents owned.
Oh, my
It was their bakery. She writes about it. I just finished reading. She talked to her mother, Rochelle Udell, about the bakery in her new book, What Goes With What. And so that was the bakery. So our bread came from Ratchik's. We always had boxed cookies. We had Malamars only in winter because you couldn't get them in summer. I think you still can't get them in summer. And melody cookies. We had butter cookies from Sutter's Bakery. And we had an Ebbinger's, which was a legendary Brooklyn baker, on the same street with Ratchik's and Sutter's, and it was a great, and DeFaro pizza. But the chocolate cake from Ebbinger's, I tried to make it, never succeeded. But the Ebbinger's cake that I almost recreated is what's on the cover of Baking From My Home to Yours. So that was the chocolate cake that was for special occasions, for birthdays. There was always something sweet and delicious in the house. Oh, my gosh.
I love that. First of all, that cake, it was my gateway to Dorie Greenspan. That's the first thing I ever baked of yours. I love that cake so much. And listeners, if you have that book of Dorie's, Baking From My Home to Yours, there's this beautiful chocolate cake with the white.
So the Ebbinger's cake had like a chocolate, almost pudding filling and chocolate all over it. It was called a blackout cake. Quick funny story. I wanted to recreate the cake. I had tried, couldn't do it, gave it up. My manuscript was just about, for Baking From My Home to Yours, was just about ready to go in. And Michael said, "You want to try one more time?" And he loved that cake. And I tried and got the frosting all wrong. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put a white frosting on it. I thought, should I send it in? Should I not? I included it in the manuscript at the very last minute, and it ended up on the cover.
Oh, my gosh. And it's so delicious. I love that cake so much because it's marshmallow.
It's marshmallow, of course.
And I love marshmallow. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Today's episode is presented by California prunes, the best kind of prunes out there. I am a big fan of California prunes for two reasons. They're a great addition to your pantry when it comes to smart snacking and baking. You probably already know that prunes are good for your gut. You might even know that prunes are also good for your bone health. But what you really need to know is that prunes are absolutely delicious in both sweet and savory dishes. But don't just take it from me. Here's what some of the country's top culinary experts have to say. Chef Bronwyn Wyatt of Bayou St. Cake says, prunes have an earthy, winey richness that pairs beautifully with the tart, fresh flavor of berries. Chef Kat Turner from Highly Likely in LA says, they are an incredibly versatile ingredient that strike a great balance between sweet and savory. They are incredibly sensual. Ana Castro from Akamaya in New Orleans says, prunes have a sultriness to them. They are very rich and like velvet. I like to use prune puree in my baked goods to give them great flavor and also to replace some of the sugar, eggs, or fat in the recipe. It's super easy to whip up. Just blend prunes and water together and voila. For recipe ideas and more, be sure to check out the California Prunes website at californiaprunes.org. Happy baking and happy snacking. This episode is presented by Ghirardelli, making life a bite better. We're in the heart of the holiday season right now, my favorite time of year. How happy are you? I know so many of you talented professional bakers out there are whipping up delicious cookies, cakes, brownies, bars, and other holiday confections. The only thing better than something baked during the holidays is something baked with chocolate. That's why I'm excited to tell you all about Ghirardelli's convenient 5-pound bags of chocolate, which come in 8 different varieties and are available at restaurant supply stores and online. I know we all go through a lot of chocolate this time of year, so these are perfect. Ghirardelli has milk and semi-sweet chocolate chips for adding into classic bakes, milk and dark wafers for coating and drizzling, even dark chocolate barista chips you can sprinkle on desserts and drinks. All you professional bakers listening out there know that the best baked goodies are made from the highest quality ingredients. Did you know that Ghirardelli chocolate only uses top quality beans that are traceable right back to the farmers who grew them all around the world? They also only roast the heart of the cacao bean, called the nib, instead of the whole bean, to make sure their products have the most consistent, intense, chocolatey flavor possible. And they refine their chocolate to teeny tiny particles, 19 microns to be exact, which is what gives Ghirardelli chocolate its creamy, velvety texture. To learn more about Ghirardelli professional products and request samples, visit Ghirardelli.com/professional. Or you can find their products at kitchen supply stores like Chef Store, Webstaurant, and Amazon. Are you looking for that perfect gift for a foodie friend? Check out Cherry Bomb's holiday gift guides, which are filled with delicious ideas and suggestions for your nearest and dearest. There's something for everyone, from the pastry pros and beginner bakers to the mix masters and sporty spice lovers in your life. Or, if you have a loved one who wants to build their community and network within the world of food, beverage, and hospitality, consider gifting a Cherry Bomb membership. Members get special perks like access to our virtual monthly meetings. Plus, they get specially priced tickets to our annual Jubilee Conference that's happening Saturday, April 12th in New York City. To learn more about the membership program and to browse the gift guides, head to cherrybomb.com. Now back to our guest. 2 other little sweets from Dorie's childhood that I mined from your books. The bird seed from your grandma's purse.
Oh, so my grandmother she had 2 candies in her purse all the time. One was a raspberry hard candy that it took forever to suck your way down to the center. But when you got there, it was a little jammy. And so that came in cellophane, they twisted on either side. And then they were sesame and honey. I don't know. I was so young. And they were little squares, also wrapped perfectly in cellophane. You could lose a tooth on one of those, but I used to love those.
Oh, and I just love the name Birdseed in Your Grandma's Purse. It's just so, I love all of that together. And then the final thing that I know that you loved, which I loved, you loved mint chocolate chip ice cream from Howard Johnson's?
Oh.
I mean, Howard Johnson's was around when I was little.
I was going to say, you don't seem old enough.
No, but mine was Baskin-Robbins.
Okay.
I loved their mint chocolate chip.
So I'm sure that the Howard Johnson's was filled with who knows what.
Yeah.
But it was so minty. And the chips were great. They were kind of flat and sharp at the edges. is this true? I don't know. In my memory,
yeah.
that's the way they were.
Yeah.
And they were large enough that when you got them, you could chew on them.
Yes.
You know, they were really there. It wasn't some little...
I love that. So you married Michael at 19, and so began your sort of cooking and baking journey. Although your mom had not baked, Michael's mom had, right?
Michael's mother was a good cook who decided by the time I met her, she didn't want to cook anymore. But she was good, and Michael has great memories of like friends coming to the house, and his mom would make pancakes, and she would use 2 skillets, and she'd flip them. Can you imagine?
No.
She did make French fries and didn't burn down the kitchen, and they were great. She made them once for me, but when Michael was little, she would make them, and she would wrap them in a newspaper cone.
I love that, like he was at a fair at Coney Island or
Right?
something. Oh,
Right?
I love that.
And she also, I remember coming into the house, I don't remember whether we must have been married because I had a kitchen, and she was making knishes, something I never thought could be made by humans. I was sure that they fell from the sky along with ketchup or something. And she gave me this little card with oil stains on it, and she said, this is the recipe. She said, now feel the dough. The dough should feel like this. If it's too hard, add a little more oil. If it's too soft, add flour. And she sent me home. 2:00 in the morning, I am in the kitchen, right? It's like the sorcerer's apprentice. The dough is growing. Too soft? Okay.
Yeah.
Add flour. Never got it.
Oh, my gosh, I love that. I love that. And didn't she have kind of a, I don't know, infamous, but a arugula recipe that she shared with you?
Oh, she did. She did.
And didn't you once put Triscuits in it? And Michael was not happy.
Oh, he was surprised. But, you know, a girl's got to try everything.
Of course she does. That's why he married you. But so she did share some baking recipes, or at least like that one.
Do I remember her making them? She must have. But, you know, I wanted to do everything. I still do. Yeah. But, you know, everything was brand new. I didn't know. I thought she invented arugula. You know, I didn't know that, like, cream cheese dough was everywhere and probably came off the back of a box or something. But she was really great. She was funny, too.
I love that. All right, I want to touch on a few more Dorie things that I love before we talk cookies. So I want to talk a little bit about France. I read, and I'm not sure how old you were when this happened, but I read that at some point, I think you were little, you had said to your mom that you wished you'd been born there. And I just wondered, or maybe you were an adult, but I just wondered who introduced you to France? Like, how did it happen that you fell in love? Because did your parents take you when you were little?
No, absolutely. No. I think we went to Canada. I think that was...
That was the trip.
That was the trip. I got married when I was 19. I was a college student. Back in those days, you could get a really cheap charter flight with your student ID. And so Michael and I took a trip to London, Amsterdam, Paris. It was the first time I got a passport so I could do this. I got to Paris and thought, this is where I was meant to be. I've never felt that way. I had never, before I hadn't gone anyplace, but even Canada, I didn't feel that way. But I'd never felt that way before. And I've been lucky enough to travel, and I've loved places. I've never felt that way again. It was just something that touched me deeply.
Does he also love France the way you do?
He loved it not as profoundly as I did, but it's grown on him.
Good. Thank goodness. That would be problematic if it had not. There was also this, I can't remember which book I read this in, but at one point when you were working with Julia Child, I think she put her arm around you and she said, we're just a pair of home bakers.
She said that.
Oh my gosh, tell us everything.
She always thought of herself as a home baker and a home cook. When people would say Chef Child or Chef Julia, she would stop them immediately and say, I'm not a chef. She said, I have great respect for chefs. I am not a chef. Now, she's trained at Le Cordon Bleu, but she had never, I don't think she ever worked in a kitchen. And the fact that she saw herself as a home cook and a home baker was part of the reason that she was able to communicate with us home cooks and home bakers so well, because she really saw things from a home kitchen. the way she tested recipes impeccably, endlessly, was because she had this real feeling for home cooks and bakers and wanted them to succeed.
Another thing I was hoping you'd tell us about is just your notebooks. I assume they're still a part of you, but I feel like a lot of things I read, you'd always you have your notebooks where you're jotting down things.
I've got one in my bag outside.
Oh. So are they recipe notebooks? Are they travel notebooks? Are they just Dorie notebooks?
So they're everything. And what's funny is a couple of months ago, I guess, Joshua, son, and Michael decided that they would collect all the notebooks that they could find and put them in a box in the hopes that I might one day sit down and look at them and put them together in some way. So I always keep a notebook in my purse. I have notebooks on my desk. I take notes when I'm traveling, but it's my recipe notebooks that I like to use grid paper. I learned this the hard way. I date everything. I didn't for a long time. I have little codes for myself so that when something, I always do everything in pencil and paper and then transcribe it, which is probably why there are, I miss the butter in a recipe. Oh, please, because I'm transcribing. I think on paper. That's the way I do it. And then if a recipe is good, it gets 3 purple stars. And when I've transcribed it, it gets a check mark. And then I can turn the page.
Tell us, I don't know if it still has this name, but you do have this new cookbook you referenced coming out in 2025. I think, or at least right now, the working title is Kitchen Cakes. Can you tell us anything about it?
I can tell you a lot about it, except the title. Now we're not sure.
Okay.
Hello out there, if you have.
Send Dorie a title.
Right. Well, I don't know what the title is. The reading title was going to be Simple, Simpler, Simplest. So they're really simple cakes. Originally, I thought I wasn't going to frost any of them, but really, there are loaf cakes and bundt cakes, and I think the majority of the cakes can be mixed in a bowl with a whisk. They're really whim cakes. You could bake them on a whim. I had so much fun doing this.
Oh.
And I realized, I keep thinking about the Coco Chanel quote about, before you leave the house, take off one accessory.
Yes.
And I felt that way about these cakes, that I'd start thinking, I could add this. I could. And then I could subtract this.
Mm-hmm.
I could take this away. I could really build flavor in another way. I could really pay attention to texture. So they're very simple cakes. And, bum-ba-da-dum-bum-bum, wait until you see. I can't wait to see everything put together. Nancy Pappas did paintings they're so beautiful, for each cake.
Oh, my God.
They are so
no
beautiful.
Photography?
No photography.
Oh, my gosh,
These
Dorie.
beautiful paintings. It's very exciting.
Oh, my gosh, I can't wait. Tell us about you and cookies, because I've heard it described as, and you've said this, friends forever, you and cookies.
Yes. It's fun to talk to you about cookies, having spent 2 years in cakes. It's kind of good to come back. I love cookies for a million reasons. As an eater, I love them for their oneness, right? All yours. Hold the little cookie, eat it the way you want, big bites, little bites. I love cookies for their possibilities. When I was writing the cookie book and when Joshua and I had the cookie shop, Burr and Sell, just the ideas kept sparking. I would make a cookie and I'd think, this is a good base for bum-ba-da-dum-bum-bum. It could be so many things. The idea that cookies could be savory was really exciting when I was working. That cookies could be, I stretch the definition of cookies. Brownies are cookies in the cookie book and brownies are cakes in the cake book. But I think it's the possibilities. I think for any of us bakers who love to play around, build, cookies are a great place to be imaginative.
I think your son Joshua named himself, or maybe you named him, but he is a totally self-identified cookie monster.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which I adore for a mother-son situation.
I think his Instagram still reads reformed. Yes.
There is a cookie monster mention in his profile. I did look. Tell us a little bit about beurre sel, which you had for about 5 years.
It felt like 5 minutes. Well, sometimes it felt like a lifetime, but butter and salt. Joshua and I had this little cookie business, which started as a pop-up. I just thought that every package that came out of that bakery was beautiful, just beautiful. Joshua did the design. We made our cookies so that they were all the same size. They were packed in cylinders, which really, it turns out, it took us a long time to find them, but were golf ball, the containers that you get for golf balls. And so we made little 2-inch round cookies that stacked in these cylinders. They were really beautiful. One of the problems with the business was me, because I couldn't stop thinking about cookies. So just as I said to you that I love cookies because they were possibilities, we were the teeniest shop. The shop was the same size as my cookie book. It was so small. And we filled it with our line of cookies. And then I would taste a cookie and I'd think, oh, but I could make this in coconut. And I would go, right. So we learned a lot in the course of the business. One of the things we learned was for me to just stay within the bounds, color within the lines. And so it was after Burn Cell that I wrote the cookie book, and I thought, no more lines. I can just go crazy now.
And were all of them sablé?
Most of them were sablé. We had a cookie called the Chunker, which could not, so all of our cookies had to be 2 inches for the little cylinders and 3 inches for the shop. But the Chunkers were uncontainable. They were just filled with, now I don't remember, maybe 4 different kinds of chocolate and cocoa and chopped cashews and cherries, and they were big. They were chunky. So those were not sablé. We made a cookie for Crash, graffiti artist, and those cookies were like oatmeal cookies. They were so good. And those were uncontainable. It was fun to kind of figure out. I tried to contain everything, and not everything can be made to behave. Not everything wants to be contained.
Yes, those are words to live by. Not everything can be contained. We try. First of all, just describe sablé for us, for people that do not know.
Yeah, so a sablé is essentially a shortbread cookie. Sable is the French word for sand, and sablé is sandy. So they have palais, which are thicker. Some cookies in Brittany, Normandy, are sablé, but they call them galette, or they might be a little larger. So it's a shortbread cookie, sometimes with egg yolks, sometimes without. I mean, the classic shortbread does not have an egg.
Oh, interesting. You said that they're as popular in France as chocolate chip cookies are in the United States, which I love to think about them that way culturally.
Yes.
So I'm just going to go over a few of the tips, like the general sablé tips, and then we'll see us using these tips as we go through our recipe.
Sure.
So first of all, you say, which is important in many cookies, but fresh butter. And you want it to be soft and not greasy. And I thought this was interesting. You said that the softness is actually what's going to contribute to the sandiness. And if it's too greasy or melty, you're not going to get your sandiness.
You don't get the texture when, and this is pretty much true of really most cookies. You want the butter to keep its shoulders so that, if you press it, you get an indentation, but it doesn't just sag. Keeps good posture.
The goal here is not light and fluffy. You do not want to beat your butter and sugar till they're light and fluffy, because when you beat air into the cookies, they'll rise or they'll puff up while they bake, and then they'll collapse.
Yeah. So a cookie is not, for a cake, you want that air. For a cookie, you want to mix the ingredients. It's really, you don't see the expression cream the butter and sugar together as much as you used to, but that's really what you're looking for, that creamy texture.
When we do add our dry ingredients, our flour, we want to, I love these adjectives for it, but we want to add it softly and gently, which is this is a make or break step, again, to get the texture, that sandiness that we want.
Right.
We're going to add our flour all at once.
So I started doing that. I still pretty much do that. I had this idea. I have no idea if it's right or wrong. And certainly you can't do it if you're making, huge quantities. But I kept thinking about how when we add flour in gradually, we keep mixing and mixing. And so the flour that goes in first gets mixed and mixed and mixed. And I had this idea that it would be better to just put all the flour in at once, mix it, and then if need be, finish it by hand. I don't know, because I took math and science for poets, I don't know if it's real, if it's proof, but it just made sense to me that with the cookies, it would be best to just get the flour in and spin it as little as possible.
And you also even say to guard more against overmixing, maybe at the end when maybe there's still a few streaks of flour, then take it off your mixer and do that by hand.
Do you do that often?
Do.
Yeah, so do
I do.
I do it with most baked
Yeah, even when I cake, everything I do, I kind of want to stop moving things around when I can only see a streak or two left of flour.
And also, if you're adding nuts or chips or something, always good to stop at that point where you still see some flour. Put the add-ins in if you're not going to add them by hand, and then finish
Would you
spinning
ever
them.
add them? Because I wonder about this in not necessarily sablé, in everything. What about adding with the flour, since we don't want to overmix?
Oh, that's interesting.
Should we add them earlier? Like put our chips in to our chocolate chip cookies when we add our flour. Put our nuts in.
Have you tried?
I have. I have not. I've seen no problems, but I think it's interesting that it's not typically. Also, it seems like...
That's very interesting.
And if you're talking about a recipe where you don't want that add-in to sink, like maybe in a cake or a loaf, it makes even more sense because you're covering them in flour, or you're,
okay, I can't finish the interview. I have to go home and try this. Sorry.
Bye, Dorie. Thanks for coming. And then just two more little tips. Chilling is super important with our sablé.
So important.
At least 2 hours. And I thought it was interesting. Makes sense, I guess, but it helps not only with flavor, but also with shape.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, which is also good to know because we all want to eat warm cookies, but you say you really think these are best at room temp.
Go ahead, have a sablé warm if you want, but I think cooling is really part of the baking process in a way. One of the things that's so wonderful about a sablé is the texture. You don't get it when it's warm. You can get some of the flavor. You can get a little, you'll taste the salt, but you're missing the sabléness of the cookie.
All right, so now we're going to talk about world peace cookies. They're a chocolate sablé, but they do have some chocolate chip cookie elements, which we're going to talk about. Originally inspired by Pierre Hermé's chocolate Korova cookies that he made for the now defunct Korova restaurant in Paris. Yeah. He took the chocolate sablé, but he added some chocolate chip cookie elements like a little bit of brown sugar for chewiness, lots of chopped chocolate, and salt, which you say is now everywhere, but back then, that was pretty special.
I love this cookie.
Oh, good.
I love this cookie. And it's all Pierre's recipe. Pierre gave me this recipe in 1998, 99, but I met him maybe like 1993. And at that time, he gave me fleur de sel, which is hand-harvested sea salt. He gave it to me to taste and to touch because it feels different from...
You describe it as moist.
Yeah. Fresh salt is moist. You can bite it and you can hear the little crunch, and it holds some of that crunch in baking. It's less salty than salt. The crystals, it's a beautiful salt. I had never heard of it, never tasted it. He gave it to me to taste because he was using it in pastry in 1993 when I met him. And I said, salt. And at that time, people in general in cooking and baking, a pinch of salt. Everything was a pinch. He was measuring the salt. He was weighing the salt. And he said to me, you use salt in pastry the way you use it in cooking. It's to season what you're baking. This seems like a commonplace now, but it was revolutionary. We were just moving away from the drop of vanilla, the pinch of salt, and coming into bigger flavors.
The other thing you've said, which I love, is that this Korova cookie, this world peace cookie, was like as important a culinary breakthrough as like our Toll House.
I really think so because, once again, I come back to the salt. It's funny, I've forgotten half a teaspoon or a quarter. I mean, there's not much. And yet you recognize that there was salt. It was present in a way that it hadn't been present in other cookies. And it's a funny-looking cookie. I think it's beautiful, but it's not reliable in terms of what it looks like. They all look different. It's unexpected when you look at it. I don't think you expect that texture, which, because of the brown sugar, is a little chewy, but still has the sandiness of a sablé. And you don't expect that salt, which just lingers enough to make you want another cookie.
So, as you just said, the dough can be a teeny bit finicky. It can be different from batch to batch. But a good note for folks is it's best to mix the dough for as long as it takes to get big, moist curds that hold together when you press them.
This took me a while to come to because I was so afraid of over-mixing it. I think the brown sugar gives you a little leeway. The dough can be crumbly. It can be frustrating. It's a dry dough. But if you mix it enough, it comes together and it does form curds, and you can then knead it.
But I did love this idea of the curds and also kind of the kneading of the dough afterwards to bring it together.
Yes,
yeah.
And it needs to be kneaded.
You also say not to use like mini chocolate chips, but really it's important to chop your own. When we do chop our own chocolate, are we kind of looking for mini chip size?
Yeah. Well, I don't like to be precise about chopped chocolate. I like when there are all different sizes because then each bite is something different. I like to include the dust from chopping chocolate, so all that little delicious dust, chocolate dust. Of course you can use chocolate chips, but chocolate chips melt in a very specific way, and they also firm it as they cool. So you get a bite of chocolate, and it's nice. But I think when you have chopped chocolate, and it's all different sizes, and you have the dust, it adds to the chocolateness of the cookie. It's just a different pleasure in every bite.
The cookie is interesting in terms of how it can be assembled because we can use 2-inch rings, which we're going to talk about. This can be a slice and bake, and it can also be rolled out and cut with a cookie cutter.
Yes. The way it's made, I think this is even the way Pierre Hermé still makes the cookie, is a slice and bake. That was the original recipe that was given to me, was slice and bake. I rolled and ringed for beurre and sel, but it's really a slice and bake cookie, which, I mean, what could be better? It means that you've got a world peace in your freezer.
At all times.
At all times.
And you do say if you're making the slice and bake version, kind of the classic version, where you just need to check that your logs are really solid as you're shaping them because they can have those funny holes in them, and then you slice and you're like, what happened?
Yeah, you've got to feel them. And it's, how many years have I been making these cookies? I've finally gotten over the idea of over mixing it to get the dough right, and I'm making this motion like I'm making cookie logs, but, of rolling the logs. It's more important that they're solid than, don't worry about having to do it a second time or so.
So for the recipe, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sift together some all-purpose flour, some cocoa powder. It's Dutch processed cocoa powder.
Yeah.
So we're sifting all-purpose flour, Dutch processed cocoa powder, baking soda together.
Right.
Then in a stand mixer with our paddle attachment.
Time out. May I just say something?
Yeah.
So I'm lazy, and I like to whisk my ingredients and avoid sifting whenever I can. But confectioner's sugar and cocoa need to be sifted. So, yeah.
But that makes a lot of sense because it's almost always, unless it's fresh from the bag,
There's
it's always lumpy.
Yep.
So we're sifting because of that cocoa powder. That's such a good tip and note. Then with our stand mixer fitted with our paddle attachment, or we can use a large bowl with a hand mixer, we're going to beat unsalted room temp butter that we earlier described. It's soft, it's not greasy, with some brown and white sugars together, a little bit more brown than white, and I'm assuming that's for that chew we're after.
Texture, right.
And then on medium speed, we don't want to get too high because, again, we're working against fluffy.
Right.
We're going to beat or cream until soft, creamy, homogeneous, about 3 minutes. Do we need to scrape the bowl?
Yes.
Okay.
So having just reread my manuscript for the cake book, I've gone back and added scrape, or don't forget to scrape, or you must scrape. Yes, you should scrape.
I thought this was so interesting. There are no eggs here.
No. I get questions from people all the time. I'm about to make the world peace cookie. Is it a mistake that there are no eggs? No eggs. Yeah.
So now we're going to beat in our fleur de sel, which I have all these notes. What is it? Moist, brand. But we talked about. But I will ask, is there a brand that you love?
So I buy the fleur de sel that comes from Guérande, from Brittany. At the time that I started, you couldn't get anything else. But now there's fleur de sel from everywhere in America that has, salt. No, but sometimes you can't see it. In the supermarket, you can get these little boxes from the Camargue, and that salt is good, but you can't see it. If you can find someplace where you can actually see the salt and you can see if it's just a little moist.
Yeah.
That's what you want.
You say you can use fine sea salt, but it sounds to me like might be a good purchase for this cookie just because it's really sounds so special. And then we're going to add a little vanilla. I can't remember if you're a make-your-own vanilla girl or if what's your brand?
So I love the Sonoma syrup. It's called Vanilla Crush.
Mm-hmm.
It has 3 different kinds of vanilla in it. I love that.
Now we're going to turn off our mixer, add all of our dry ingredients, and we're turning it off because, of course, we don't want it to balloon in our faces.
Also, it's a good idea to put a towel over your mixer.
Yes.
Yes.
Important step. We're doing it all at once, again, for our sandy texture. And to not overmix. And we're going to pulse a few times to start blending. And then when our risk of flying, I love the way you write recipes, so sometimes I have to include your language. But when the risk of flying flour has passed, we're going to turn our mixer to low and beat until the dough forms these big moist curds that'll hold together when pressed, as we mentioned.
Right. You have to reach in and touch it and see how it feels.
We're going to toss in our chopped bittersweet chocolate pieces, but also some of the dust, maybe a little bigger. Mini chip size, and mix to incorporate. And as we've said, it's a little unpredictable, sometimes crumbly, sometimes comes together, clean side of the bowl. I thought that conversation about the cocoa powder is so interesting. Sometimes we make choices about ingredients, not realize, as a home baker, not recipe writer, not realizing how it impacts the outcome. We'll turn our dough out onto a work surface, gather it together, kneading it to bring it together, divide it in half, shape it into 2 logs. I love this too. We're shaping it into 1.5-inch diameters, and you say, do not worry about the length, just get the diameter right. Which I always find that I do that when I'm writing recipes. If people have one of the measurements right, they're going to be totally fine. You don't need both.
Now, years later, I will say that you can, because I do this sometimes, make 3 logs, and they're smaller.
A little easier.
Yeah, I sometimes do that. If I've got a lot of people coming.
Yeah. And if you get like a hollow spot in the log, you can just start over. Just need to keep checking as we discussed. We'll wrap our logs in plastic wrap. We'll freeze for 2 hours or refrigerate for at least 3 for flavor and for shape.
And for baking because they need to go into the oven cold.
So they don't spread too much.
Right.
Yeah. When we're ready to bake, we'll have our center rack in our oven. And I thought this was interesting. We're preheating to 325. Is that a little low?
That's lower than normal for cookies, which are 350, 375. But it's so important. If you go higher, you'll end up with lace cookies. This is a cookie where, and I made a little note to myself to remember to tell you this. Don't go higher. This cookie really needs that temperature.
We'll line with parchment paper or silicone baking mats. I wondered if you had a preference and if you have a brand of mat that you like.
I was using Silpat. I'm now using parchment more often.
We're going to work with 1 log at a time, use a long, sharp knife, and slice our dough into 1/2-inch thick rounds.
Not so easy to slice when they're come out of the freezer. And they may crumble, crack, and break. Just squeeze them together.
Okay.
In fact, if I could write the recipe over again these years later, I might say pull it from the freezer and wait just 5 minutes or something to get started cutting. They get hard.
And freezer or refrigerator?
Well, I usually freeze them.
You do?
I mean, but it can be refrigerated.
Yeah. You did write in the recipe, the rounds might crack as you cut them. Don't be concerned. Just squeeze the bits back onto each cookie.
When you're making slice and bakes and you're slicing them, do you roll?
Yes. You want to tell us about that?
Well, or you can, but
The idea being that because you don't want to get a flat side on your cylinder,
right?
Each cut, turn the cylinder a teeny bit. Take another cut, maybe even running it along the counter once or twice to make sure that you're keeping it round.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These are so frozen that sometimes that's hard to do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We're going to arrange our rounds on our baking sheets, leaving about 2 inches between them. If we're baking off all of our cookies, so we've cut both logs, we're going to keep one baking sheet in the fridge while we bake the other.
I like to bake one at a time. You too? Yeah.
100%. Now, this is an alternative. So that's the slice and bake.
Right.
Or we can roll our dough between two pieces of parchment.
I always roll between two.
We can roll our dough.
And roll it straight from the mixer.
Right, which I love. Such a good tip.
Yeah.
So the idea, listeners, is that you're not chilling it and then rolling it. You are rolling it right when it comes out of the mixer between two pieces of parchment to a thickness of about 3/8 of an inch.
They have to be thick.
Interesting.
Right. I mean, we would normally roll cookies to quarter an inch or something.
Right.
Yeah. No, these have to be
a little thicker. Refrigerate or freeze as you would the logs. Mm-hmm. And then if you have 2-inch baking rings, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit about rings, is there a brand? Where do we purchase? And should we be picturing a cake ring, except it's tiny and it's for a cookie?
Right.
Or is it like a biscuit cutter? No. Okay.
So when I had this idea for burn cell that I wanted the cookies to all be the same size, I really needed that because we wanted this packaging and I couldn't find a way to develop the recipes to be that. We bought Ateco rings. This is an expensive way to start a business. So they are, how high are they? The Atecos were kind of high. I think they may have been like 1.5 inches high or so. Sometimes they're called entremet rings. They're used to build desserts. We eventually had these made for us. They're, I guess, about 1 inch high or so. For the world peace cookies, ringing them is not that important. And you have to, and they grow in a way that the other cookies didn't. So with our ring cookies, we were able to cut the dough with the ring and go directly from cut to the baking sheet and bake in the ring. The world peace cookies need a little space. So you cut them slightly smaller than the 2-inch ring and put them in the center. Tim from Lottie and Doof, when he saw the rings, said to me, why can't we bake these in muffin tins? And I thought, you brilliant guy. And so while we never did this professionally, it's what I do at home all the time. You can cut 2-inch cookies, put them in the muffin rings. You can do that for almost all of my sablé, but not world peace. They just don't bake right. I haven't figured out why.
For this cookie, your best bet is rings or
slice and bake.
Slice and bake.
And I would opt for slice and bake.
Yep. We're going to bake the cookies for about 12 minutes. We're not going to open the oven, which I thought was interesting because I always rotate.
Well, I mean, if you have a really serious hot spot, my feeling about rotating cookies is if you can avoid it, do.
Okay.
Because you've preheated your oven,
yep.
Right? You're opening it up. You're putting the cookie sheet in. You're closing the oven, so you've lost some heat. Every oven cycles differently. Now, 6 minutes later, you're going to open the oven door, fiddle with the baking sheet, turn it around, close it again. I don't know what's happening in there in terms of heat. Better to hold still.
So when our timer rings, they may not look done, they won't be firm, and that's exactly right. We're going to transfer the baking sheet to a cooling rack, let the cookies rest until only just warm, at which point you can munch them, but you recommend room temp because you say the texture's more interesting.
The texture really is. You won't get the sandiness. You won't get the difference between cookie and chocolate. Have a cookie.
Yeah.
But then have the rest of them later.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today,
I
Dorie.
love you. I love talking to you. I love cookies, baking. This is just such a treat. Thank you.
I just want to say that you are and will always be my cherry pie.
Oh.
That's it for today's show. Thank you to King Arthur Baking Company, Kerrygold, California Prunes, and Ghirardelli for supporting this episode. You can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.com. Don't forget to follow She's My Cherry Pie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and tell your pals about us. She's My Cherry Pie is a production of the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. Our producers are Carrie Diamond, Catherine Baker, and Jenna Sadu. Thank you so much for listening to She's My Cherry Pie, and happy baking!